Hello, and welcome to another one of our discussions on the book, Human Relations, by the Stoic philosopher Seneca. Today, we'll explore Chapter 2, which discusses books and eloquence. In reality, we'll see that he speaks much more about eloquence than about books or reading itself. Therefore, today's chapter is particularly relevant for those who appreciate oratory and the art of speech. A well-crafted speech is part of the discussion. He presents a rather beautiful analysis, though brief it is a short chapter. Now, just to quickly recap what we covered in our first discussion, Seneca, Lucius Seneca, was born in the year 4 BCE, and he passed away in the year 65 CE. In other words, he died at the age of 69. For that historical period, this was actually quite a long lifespan. He is part of the golden triad of Roman Stoic philosophy, which consists of him, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, the emperor. He was a great thinker who had a significant impact on Roman thought. He influenced generations of philosophers throughout history. He wrote the famous moral letters to Lucilius, which are exactly what we are reading under the title Human Relations, divided into chapters. He also wrote 12 dialogues, and in addition to that, 9 tragedies. In other words, he composed several tragedies in the Greek style, including ones inspired by heroes and gods from Greek mythology. Within this treatise on human relations, we have the first chapter, which discusses friendship, the second, which addresses books and eloquence, and the third, which explores the wise person and their attitude. Gratitude in the face of death is also covered, and the fourth chapter focuses on philosophy. In our first session, we already discussed friendship. Now, we'll talk about books and eloquence. I emphasize that this is very interesting for us to truly understand what constitutes an authentic discourse. And this is conveyed by a master of the genre, someone who had an exceptional command of language, said to be truly remarkable and extraordinary. Therefore, the teaching comes from someone who was deeply skilled in the very art he set out to teach. So, let's begin. The first letter in this section of the chapter is written by Lucilius. From his response, it is inferred that he was referring to a lecture he had attended an oratory piece delivered by a philosopher named Serapion. And he states that this philosopher poured out his knowledge, unleashed his ideas, as if it were a gushing stream of water. Many ideas, in great quantity and at high speed, to the point that it left the audience somewhat dazed. And Seneca specifically addresses this style of oratory as well as its opposite. He states that extremes in oratory are highly undesirable, both the torrent of words and the drop-a-drop approach. Neither drop-a-drop nor flood. What would these two things be? The flood of words consists of pouring out ideas primarily to show that you possess them. In this case, the focus of oratory is not the message, but the speaker. It is about projecting the speaker as someone cultured and highly knowledgeable about ideas from all eras, someone who masters a vast amount of information but does not actually convey it. On the other hand, there is the speaker who drips ideas too slowly. He says that this slowness causes the audience to be overcome with anxiety. The pace must be appropriate, suited to the message. One must find the right balance to convey ideas effectively. He goes on to say that, in addition to carefully adjusting the speed and amount of information to match the listener's comprehension at a natural pace that aligns with the listener's logic, the speech must have truth as its objective. It must be simple, without affectation. And then remember Cicero, who is also a great orator who addresses this subject when he says that a good orator is one who makes people leave, but thinking about themselves. The core is the truth. And a good orator is merely someone who does not obstruct the passage of that truth through him. He is a mediator between certain laws, certain ideas of the universe, and his audience. And this topic alone could certainly be the subject of an entire lecture. If we go back to Greek mythology, to the Greek world, we'll see that ideas were considered gods, serving as guiding principles for the advancement of human consciousness. The true ideas, the profound ones, those capable of penetrating the human heart and bringing forth a new light, a new illumination both within and without these are divine. And therefore, man must be able to recognize ideas, and as Cecilia Meyrell suggested, reach such a level of greatness that he himself becomes an illuminating idea for the world. In other words, our essence, which is divine, would assume the same role as the gods in the case of a polytheistic civilization. And it would also illuminate the path of all the travelers who come after us. So this flow is quite fascinating. Some time ago, I was reading a work by a rather recent writer from the past century, an American inventor, Buckminster Fuller, who said that the human being is a verb that flows amidst various markers, such as the culture of its time, the knowledge of its time, the obstacles of its time, and ideas. Timeless ideas, eternal ideas. It is something that flows inherently, truly from our essence. Being an illuminating idea, it continuously remembers itself as it flows through these markers of life. In the end, at its core, everything is quite similar and profoundly interesting. It seems that all those who have advanced a little further in understanding how human consciousness evolves arrive at very similar insights. Continuing, he will cite a very beautiful passage from the Iliad, which speaks about the hero Odysseus. But when the great voice rose from his chest, and he cast forth words like flakes of snow, then no mortal could rival Odysseus. Imagine a man who stands tall, like a marvel, a great hero, courageous and noble. Yet, at the same time, he knows how to speak words like snowflakes, a powerful voice delivering a speech that is both gentle and striking, reaching the ears of his audience in a way that softly penetrates them and effectively conveys his message. And this is what Homer conveys in this passage about Ulysses, stating that in this, no one could surpass him. It is no coincidence that, within Greek mythology, Ulysses represents intelligence itself, human reason taken to its highest expression. Guided by Athena, the goddess of wisdom, a perfect oratory. Shouldn't a speech aimed at healing the soul penetrate deeply within us? In other words, if a speech has this purpose, and it must, because otherwise it is not a true speech, a speech that does not aim to heal the soul of its listener as mere noise. It is not a genuine discourse. It lacks even a single true idea. Today, we have become quite accustomed to this, even if we are not fully aware of it. But it becomes exhausting, the sheer amount of text that reaches us, devoid of a single meaningful idea. For him, that was just noise. It was not a true discourse. A discourse, as he saw it, conveys an idea with the purpose of healing the soul, awakening the soul. The first thing it must have done is to heal the soul, the very soul of the one who delivers it. It is a matter of basic coherence, of integrity. Medicines that do not remain in our body for some time have no effect. In this poor form of eloquence, there is much emptiness and smoke. More noise than true strength. If a true discourse is a sword, then it is placed in the hands of a hero like Odysseus. Forceful, capable of overcoming the resistance of personality and penetrating the soul of the one who listens. It is forceful. Though gentle, it has the power to open doors and reach the human heart. When it is not, it is merely noise, devoid of any idea and unexperienced even by the one who delivers it. I was greatly reminded of Shankaracharya, the great master of Indian Vedanta, when he says that knowledge is like medicine. It cannot take effect if you do not ingest it and merely pronounce its name. I find this example very amusing. Imagine if I kept reading acetylsalicylic acid without actually taking it, the blessed medicine, and expected it to cure my headache. He called this superficial knowledge merely quantitative, overly intellectual insufficient to penetrate the human being, the soul, and the body, to bring healing, to shake the consciousness and awaken it to Iona. That is why it was said that ideas are divine, that they are the very gods themselves, because they have the power to knock on the doors of the soul and compel the soul to come to the threshold. Doors that receive them, in other words, they awaken what man understands as most essential. Beyond that, it would be mere noise. The orator may become impassioned, but only on the condition that he does not lose his dignity. It is quite amusing in these letters because Seneca imagines Lucilius' questions and answers them in advance. Of course, he does not wait for him to ask, because letters, especially at that time, with difficult and slow transit, already anticipates. He responds in advance to Lucilius' possible inquiries. He imagines, "You are going to ask me whether a true orator cannot become impassioned." He says, yes, he can, as long as he does not lose his dignity. Whether in the face of injustice, manipulation, or any form of rudeness, a true orator may indeed feel emotions rise to the surface. However, this must happen without him becoming a brute, without him descending from his human dignity. A dignity he must never relinquish, because otherwise he would have no way to convey it. He approaches Lucilio and says, "You do well not to associate with orators who seek quantity in their speeches rather than quality." Interesting, just imagine. Lengthy speeches, yet completely lacking in depth. At that moment, of course, I recall the map. That beautiful passage from the Iamachus Vaga, More Than 1,000, where it says that more than 1,000 meaningless words, a single word that brings comfort to the listener is worth far more. In other words, a word that is capable of knocking on the doors of the soul and awakening it, prompting it to respond, to open the door to that idea. If a word is not capable of completing this journey, of taking an idea to the soul of another man and making him recognize himself in that idea, it is nothing more than a mere futile exhibition of the one who pronounces it, and which has as its center more the speaker than itself. The message. Extensive literature, lengthy oratory, yet saying very little to the soul of another. It is very interesting for us to observe this because today we are living in a unique historical moment marked by a somewhat emotional oratory. An oratory that creates a certain impact, either due to the sheer amount of knowledge being presented or for some other reason. But that momentary impact, by the next day, leaves nothing behind. Absolutely nothing. Nothing penetrates deeply enough to integrate into our own consciousness as a genuine idea. He will later speak about the importance of this. The wise person should maintain a modest demeanor as well as a precise and restrained language. In other words, some embellishment is acceptable. This is not a bad thing, but never to the extent that the speaker becomes more focused on ornamentation than on conveying the message. And this is interesting because literature, when presented in this manner, in these terms, and oratory, in these terms, would struggle to reach an audience since there is no real idea being conveyed, no meaningful idea at all. Because, just like adjectives, embellishments are limited. What truly shines is the idea. Today, we get so lost in adjectives and embellishments that it often happens that there is no real idea present. And since we are not accustomed to recognizing them, we pass over such texts without noticing, and sometimes we even praise writings that say absolutely nothing. Because of the style, because of the writer's cultural background, because. In short, a collection of embellishments that dazzle the eye and stir emotions so intensely that the reader no longer recognizes them. They have lost the ability to find ideas amidst everything that is not. And this is something terrible, perhaps more serious than you might imagine. Because at its core, our consciousness expands through ideas that it integrates, that it complements, that allow it to advance, to move forward. One who is unable to recognize ideas is also unable to synthesize their own life and continuously ask themselves, what is its purpose? They risk living a life that follows no idea, serves no idea in other words, a life that says nothing to anyone, not even to themselves. Thus, the importance of not only understanding and grasping ideas, but also being able to form one's own ideas. It is evident that we cannot recognize externally what we do not possess internally. Being able to take in all the stimuli that our environment provides in, he will discuss this further ahead and extract from them a deep reflection and an original idea that adds value to the world. Those who have ideas know how to recognize when ideas are present. Those who don't have them are very impressed by all the ornaments. And they remain stuck there, constantly buying empty boxes. And that is one of the best-selling products in our historical moment, moving forward. He will advise alternating between reading and writing. Well, especially in the last 3 years of his life, when he wrote these letters, he did so prolifically. He knew he had little time left, that it would not be long before he fell into disgrace before Nero. But he says it is extremely necessary to alternate between reading and writing. He says that reading nourishes the spirit and writing distributes it. Perhaps it is not immediately clear to you what this means. If you consider the spirit as that essence within us that needs to remember itself, that needs to recognize itself externally, how many readings are truly capable of nourishing it? Sometimes we believe that in our world we have too much information. If we were to apply such a criterion, perhaps, we would realize that we have far less than we might imagine. Information that contains ideas within it that is capable of providing formation that can truly nourish the spirit. And the one who nourishes the spirit, when transferring ideas, distributes their spirit among their listeners. What we are doing at this moment is enjoying the spirit of Seneca, which he consciously left for posterity. So, for those who have this focus, I have a thirsting spirit, and therefore I seek nourishment for it through reading. They have a very clear criterion for what is worth reading and what is not. And one must have a very clear criterion, as there is so much beauty that we cannot afford to waste time on mere embellishments. Bringing together the multiple discoveries from good reading to create a single, unified essence. He even uses a choir as an example. The choir of tragedies, the Roman choir, where multiple voices, multiple instruments come together, yet they resonate as one. So, from all the reading you have done, from all the valuable information you have received, gather it all, digest it, synthesize only the best, and discard what does not serve you. Like that phrase I often say to you, a man does not live by what he eats, but by what he assimilates. In other words, synthesize all that is good, assimilate what is valuable, what leads to growth and overcoming challenges, and discard what does not serve you. From there, you create a unique touch where you add your own message, your own contribution. And later on, he will elaborate on this. So, digest the spiritual nutrients that are offered to us and store them not only in memory, but in intelligence. Assimilate them as our own. See how beautiful that is. That alone is an idea. Do you notice that there are many somewhat hazy territories? Suddenly, the idea jumps out in front of you. That is an idea. We must retain what is valuable, what we receive, not only in memory, but in intelligence. And how do we apply this? How do we assimilate something into our intelligence? By testing it through reflection and experience, and integrating it as a personal response to life. Now, it is no longer just Plato's specialty, since Plato does not charge copyright fees. Now, Plato said it, but through reflection, I realize that this truly becomes evident in certain circumstances. Therefore, Plato said it, I assimilated it as my own and added my personal experience. And I can pass it forward. This pitcher now holds a little more juice, more liquid, more water than what I originally received. The extra sip, the added experience I have lived, I pass on to the future. I add value to the things I experience and integrate. I can carry them further. A little further on, he says something else that I found very interesting, that you resemble your sources. In other words, the readings you have done, the sources from which you drew your inspiration. That you resemble your sources like a child and not like a mere portrait. Do you understand this? I read Plato, I read Aristotle, and who knows what else. I'm a child of these ideas. In other words, I inherit these ideas. But in these ideas, I'm a child. I add something of my own to this process. A portrait is one that merely clones, merely repeats. The other day, I heard a very dear person say something very interesting. That a scientific experiment can be replicated. An artistic experience, when replicated, is plagiarism. And the human being is something artistic. It has so many elements that it cannot be replicated. Plato, as if it were a scientific experiment that is repeated in the laboratory. One must inherit from him. And one must add their personal share of reflection, of experience, which allows this idea to be updated in each historical moment. Plato was a mediator. And each time we live and add our share of experience, we'll also become mediators of these ideas for the world. Like children, and not like mere portraits. Thus, our spirit should be imbued with knowledge, principles, and examples borrowed from all eras, yet harmoniously integrated. In other words, I learn from all times. I assimilate all of this, I can digest all of it, I can absorb what resonates with me and discard what does not. Then, fully integrated within myself, I unify. And I add the mark of my own identity. As a thinking individual who reflects and also has the right to hold his own perspective on ideas since he experiences them and can offer personal testimony of what these ideas do for us in practice. We must be very careful because in our historical moment, this is quite common. A factory that produces portraits, not children. If you question a thinker's idea, or add something, or revise some point, who are you to question so-and-so's ideas? I'm a human being capable of thinking, reflecting, and experiencing ideas, and therefore of contributing something to them. Because otherwise, you are merely a portrait, you are not a child of these ideas. And as we mentioned, from an artistic point of view, replicas are plagiarism, they have no value. Follow the path of wisdom. Seek the treasures that offer not ostentatious, yet still significant. The path that leads to the height of honor is filled with ambushes. Appearances are far easier to attain than essences. These are arduous and not always recognized. Whereas a mere shell that is attractive and acceptable to society, aligned with public taste, is not difficult to construct. And the competition between them is intense because they bring honor and recognition. But since they are merely shells, when they collide in this competition, many crack and collapse. Therefore, the path of honors is a very uncertain one. There will always be someone along the way trying to take advantage of what you have already built, destroying you and taking your place. Now, the path of essence that one is arduous. It brings deep satisfaction and the ability to act effectively in the world, but it is not always recognized. In fact, it is rarely recognized. I recall a quote from Indira Gandhi in which she said that there is a first group of people who get things done, and the second group of those who take the credit. Stay in that first group, there is far less competition there. And this is exactly the same advice given by Seneca. The corruption of style arises from the corruption of morals. Each person speaks as they act. In the same way, style is sometimes a reflection of the customs of an era. And then he will elaborate extensively on this topic. He will say, well, a person with a somewhat languid style, a somewhat relaxed way of speaking well, behind that there may be an indolence, a laziness, not only of the individual, but sometimes of the culture in which they are embedded. Whether it is someone's oratory style, it can reveal something about that person, about their character, and sometimes even more than that, it can reflect the state or society in which they live. An oratory that is too impetuous, too aggressive, or excessively vain. In fact, this is one of the things that stand out the most. I find that interesting. I often say that vanity is oily. Because when a person has a certain sluggishness, a certain inertia, well, sometimes it takes a more discerning eye to notice. When there is too much impetus, sometimes it also requires a deeper understanding of the restrained impulse within the oratory. But when a person is vain, even a child can perceive it. It is visible. It almost introduces a touch of cynicism, irony into their expression. Vanity always places its bearer above the rest of humanity. Therefore, it seeps through with a certain petulance between the lines. Sometimes, not only in a person who speaks, but also in someone who sings, someone who dances, or someone who plays an instrument. And after listening for 5 or 10 minutes, you already know. Wow, they play well, they sing well, but vanity seeps through every pore. And that contaminates the performance in such a way that, while a part of you might like the melody or the style, it rejects that interpretation. Notice this. We are more intuitive than we usually realize. So, he says that each person speaks as they act, and their style reflects their character. And sometimes it reflects the character of that historical moment or that culture. It's interesting that the philosopher David Hume used to say, if you want to know whether a certain piece of music from an unfamiliar culture is good or not, look for an honorable person and ask them. Because an honorable person is always a reliable judge of what expresses goodness and what does not. In the case of an exotic culture, where we have no way to measure the quality of that type of music because we are unfamiliar with it, seek out an honorable person. That person is a reliable judge who can determine whether a piece of music conveys its message or not. Whether it truly transmits its essence or merely serves as self-promotion or personal marketing for the performer. In this, there cannot be one color for intelligence and another for the soul. If the soul is healthy, well-formed, serious, and balanced, then intelligence is also steady and measured. When one deteriorates, the other is also affected by harm. Intelligence becomes distorted when it is rooted in a soul, not in the theological sense, but in the philosophical sense, as psyche as that. The psychological consciousness of a person, when it is distorted, contaminated by selfishness and arrogance, naturally, intelligence will not flow along a straight and precise path, but along a crooked one. Also seeks to manipulate things always in its favor, to see and illuminate only one angle of things, the one that benefits it the most, while disregarding the reasoning of others in favor of its own, even when those reasons are not grounded in any way. Thus, at times, you may notice a certain mental brilliance in a person, but it does not fully manifest as true intelligence because it runs along these crooked tracks, shaped by a poorly formed character. One of the elements commonly criticized in classical oratory is irony, which often borders on sarcasm. It is a cynical way of trying to belittle one's opponent. Instead of debating ideas, one attempts to demean the opponent. This is also a form of sophistry ad hominem attack, a classic fallacy of attacking the person instead of the argument. Thus, intelligence cannot function correctly and fully, following clear logic, if it is built upon a distorted character. One is inextricably linked to the other. Now, imagine the degree of contamination to which intelligence is subjected. Completely connected to the soul, it is shaped by it, obeys it, and seeks its guidance. Let it be a well-formed character, an elevated conscience, a noble soul. Only then can intelligence truly fulfill its purpose. There is no point in trying to develop intelligence without first shaping character. Otherwise, intelligence becomes, as that famous movie puts it, the devil's advocate. It rushes to justify things that are fundamentally flawed. selfish interests, crude manipulations, unchecked ambitions, excessive desires. Intelligence will strive to give all these things an appearance of truth. True intelligence can only flow from a stable character, an elevated consciousness, and a well-formed soul. That is why, indeed, wherever you see people being led astray by a corrupt way of life, you can be certain that their customs have also deviated from the right path. In other words, when you notice that a person's way of speaking spreads throughout an entire social group, when it forms the foundation of a local culture, it can be said that there is a corrupted behavior in that realm, that city, that polis. There, people develop a culture that is more of a counterculture of selfishness, seeking to take advantage of everything in life in a twisted manner, at any cost, paying the same price as their own indignity. Oratory cannot be complete, nor can it flow beautifully along the tracks of a well-formed character. Oratory is art intelligence. It is a marvelous manifestation of one of the most divine gifts that humanity possesses. Will, love, and intelligence form the tripod upon which all other human virtues stand. Therefore, if this tripod is unsteady, it is clear that everything built upon it will be distorted. Love turns into possessiveness, will becomes an unrestrained desire, and intelligence turns into sophistry. A malicious, ironic, and sarcastic sophistry that seeks to dominate others at any cost and where. Truth holds no value. The number of arguments matters far more than the truth contained in any of them. In general, truth is neither desired nor even recognized. This is a very difficult time for oratory. Since oratory, oratio, shares a root with prayer, it means speaking from the depths of your soul. And when the soul is so uncertain and so lost, speaking from the soul becomes a challenge. Often, it barely goes beyond the surface of our skin because we lack depth. We have only selfishness. And selfishness is the soul at the surface, just skin deep. This is interesting, yet also recalls the biblical phrase, "By your works I will know you." Observe the way people speak. As Socrates would say, "Speak so that I may see you." Notice how people deliver their speeches, how they defend their arguments. And through that, you will come to know much about a person's character. If you have good discernment and can recognize in their own words the clear and transparent expression of their character, this criterion will allow you to perceive it. To perceive, moreover, how true ideas are almost entirely absent from most conversations in our historical moment. Often, even from most literature. And how incredible it is that the essence is like a cake without the actual batter, only whipped cream. And people eat it, indulge in it, and no one asks about the batter. Because they no longer even know that it exists, nor that it is necessary. And a bit of what we experience today is exactly that. We are indulging in whipped cream, but we never reach the batter, and we don't even notice its absence.